Hello everyone. I'm coming to you once again from Southern California on a very rainy day, which is something we certainly need. In fact, the rain is quite a blessing. So since I'm kind of confined indoors, I thought I would do an impromptu video for you on the next assignment that is coming up, and that is the first two chapters of your paper. That'll include the statement of the problem and the review of the literature. I also want to discuss something I discovered in the new edition of the Grattan and Jones book, share that with those of you who just have the second edition, and then finally clear up a couple of questions I received from students on the discussion board responses that deals with the null hypothesis. All right, so let's see if we can get through this quickly and maybe give you some help as you prepare to write your next paper. The next paper will contain two chapters. It will have the statement of the problem and the review of the literature. The statement of the problem is your opportunity to invite the reader into and let them know about the topic you've chosen to study. My recommendation is something that's close to you in terms of your personal or professional experience. I recommend you do that because in reviewing the literature, you'll find it much more interesting if you have a personal stake in perhaps the outcome of what you want to do. I mentioned before that APA formatting discourages the use of the personal pronoun I, or in the case of multiple authors, we. This, however, is a chance where you might want to make a personal statement. Sometimes, and some students have started their paper by saying, as a former collegiate tennis player, my career ended as a result of some type of injury, and now that I'm coaching, I've noticed that this type of injury is very common amongst tennis players, and this is a topic I want to explore. You've made it personal, and that's important. You've also given it some relevance. So make sure that when you introduce the topic that you're selecting, it means something. So you're saying, I want to find out why these injuries are happening to students, as opposed to someone saying, perhaps just generally, I'd like to discuss why students drop out of Little League Baseball. There really is no statement of impact there, no real meaning, so try to add some significance to it. Somewhere in your opening, I would like to see a good, clear, concise statement either of your research question or of the hypothesis you will attempt to prove. And I like to look at it this way. Write it in a sentence that I could find and highlight with a highlighter. If I can see that, then you've probably done a pretty good job of very quickly identifying what you want to do. Make sure that it is contained somewhere in the statement of your problem, either embedded in the text or as the last sentence of the statement of the problem. The next phase is a review of the literature. I've mentioned before that the literature review should contain professional information from hopefully peer-reviewed journals that you've accessed either through Google Scholar or through Sport Discus, which you get to through the CUI Library portal. I mentioned to you that Grattan and Jones have a new edition of their book, and I recently received it. I went through it and found through the table of contents several differences in the second to the third edition. It's not really significant and shouldn't affect your ability to navigate your way through the final exam. But one thing the authors did was to include a little chapter that they called How to Read Research. Now I glanced over to the side because the book is sitting here, and what I want to do is read to you their advice on how to read research to share with those of you who have the second edition, and it might actually be a little helpful. So, pardon the glasses, but here we go. The suggestion from the author is that you should first locate and read a few articles from the field with which you are comfortable. This is a point we've already made a couple minutes ago. You want to know what the territory is that you're exploring and have had some experience with it. 2, read studies that interest you. Well, that would kind of make perfect sense, wouldn't it? Because the more interested you are, the more tied in you are to the content. 3, read the abstract first. Abstracts in most professional journals are there to tell you what to expect when you read. Now, the second half of that I'm going to add is, if you read the abstract and you're going to go ahead and read that article, read the whole thing. Don't just breeze through the abstract and then use that as part of your literature review. 4, identify research question and objectives. That's that highlighter point I just made. See if you can find out what the author is aiming at and trying to prove or to explore. 5, ask yourself, why did the researcher choose this particular setting or sample? You may have a perfectly valid reason to choose, for instance, high school students as your subject or your population sample, because that's who you coach. Reading other authors, you want to know why that sample was selected and why these subjects were subject to the study that the author conducted. 6, what were the methods chosen to collect data? This will be really significant for you when you start on your chapter that has to do with methodology. See if you can identify, first of all, was the study qualitative or quantitative, mixed, or some subsection, if you will, of research methods. 7, what were the most important findings? Identify the most important findings made by the author and identify the contribution to the knowledge or understanding that the research has made. This is another way of saying, what is the significance of this problem or this research question? 8, don't be over-concerned with statistical analysis you might encounter at this stage. Oftentimes people are put off by research because the author will go into an in-depth statement of the methodology that can be rather daunting in terms of the statistics involved. And finally, be critical but objective. And that really is true. As a matter of fact, it's really significant for anybody who wants to conduct research. We're going to talk later about a phenomenon that has to do with association and causation and our kind of natural desire to want to make connections between things we observe and decide whether or not they were actually caused by what we observed. So that gives you a little bit about the review of the literature. I'm going to emphasize once again, while you may start your review of the literature or your statement of the problem by saying, so-and-so author in Sports Illustrated dealt with the topic of young 14-year-olds and under who suffered ligament disease or problems with their elbows or throwing arm in baseball. You can do that to introduce a topic, but very quickly get into the authors that that person cited through scientific journals and make sure that you are using proven professional journals in your references. Maybe you can get away with one from a popular publication, but the rest of them should be from reputable journals. Make your statement relevant, make your question have some sort of impact to your profession. Finally, the last thing I want to do is I had some questions about the grading on the discussion question and the null hypothesis. And I want to just tell you that the authors basically state, and I'll give you their definition of a null hypothesis, is being, it suggests that there is no relationship between the variables under investigation. Some of you, in responding to the prompt, said something along the lines of, neither dynamic or static stretching works. Basically just that. What you were not describing was the fact that there was no difference between variables studied. What we were looking for was something like a statement that said, the implementation of a dynamic stretching program will cause no significant increase in performance or difference between that and a control group, and then you would control for the variables, the intervening variable being the dynamic stretching. I hope that helps clarify that. The null can be a little tricky, but that should give you a little bit of an understanding as to why you may have lost a couple of points on that one. And by the way, no one lost serious points. It really wasn't that difficult, and most all of you so far have done a very good job. All right, well, that'll wrap this video up. I look forward to communicating with you again in the near future, and I look forward to reading your papers on Assignment A that are due tomorrow, Monday the 2nd, by 11:59 p.m. Thank you. Bye-bye.